In the early 2000s, Formula 1 had an uncomfortable feeling. The winner was known before the race began. Ferrari won 15 of 18 races in a single season. And behind that numbers wasn't a talent advantage, it was a system, one the competition simply couldn't replicate. But every perfect system has its limit. April 24, 2005. Imola. 12 laps to go. Fernando Alonso checks his mirrors. The red silhouette of Schumacher fills everything behind him. The son of mechanic whose first car was welded from scrap metal. And here he is, between Ferrari and the finish line, with the 2-second gap working against him. 2 seconds per lap is 35 meters, every single lap. At that gap, an overtake isn't a question of whether, it's a question of when. Schumacher attacks at every corner, waiting for the young Spaniard to make the smallest mistake. But instead of trying to go faster, Alonso does something that contradicts every basic racing instinct. He brakes deliberately earlier, parks the car on the apex, blocks every possible line, and even though it's slower by the stopwatch, Ferrari is driving in the turbulent air behind Renault rear wing the entire time. The front axle loses downforce, and the overtake, despite every speed advantage, becomes physically impossible. For 12 laps of this dead defense, Alonso said nothing on the radio. But how did the driver, who would later earn a reputation as a Formula 1's greatest antagonist, hold that pressure? And how did one engine, with an unconventional cylinder angle, defeat the biggest budget in Formula 1? My name is Ilya, you are watching Shifted, and today, the perfect union of man and machine that ended 5 years of Michael Schumacher and Ferrari dominance. To understand why 2005 became a turning point, you first need to understand what exactly had to be broken. The 2004 season, Ferrari and Schumacher win 15 of 18 Grand Prix, and behind that numbers wasn't one single reason. It was an entire system, where every part amplified the next. Their private test track at Fiorano, right behind the factory wall, gave unlimited testing time. A new part could be designed in the morning, machined in the afternoon, and tested on real asphalt by evening. No queues, no mileage limits. Bridgestone built tires not for the entire field, but specifically for Ferrari, tuned to the stiffness of its suspension and to Schumacher's braking style. Other teams tried to fight individual components of the system, but the system as a whole was more complex than the sum of its parts. The FIA understood this, and before the 2005 season, they changed one rule that flipped the entire internal logic of racing. One set of tires for qualifying, and for the entire race, no changes. The collapse of the system was immediate. After a dismal performance at the first rounds in Australia and Malaysia, Ferrari panicked. In an attempt to save the championship, they brought their new car, the F2005, a full month ahead of schedule, to the third race, in Bahrain. But instead of salvation, the perfect machine failed on two fronts at once. First, the hardware gave out. On lap 12, Schumacher, who was chasing Alonso, simply stopped. Hydraulic failure. His first mechanical retirement in 58 consecutive Grand Prix. Then came out the tires. His teammate, Rubens Barrichello, finished the race, but crossed the line 9th. His tires completely destroyed. The team that won 15 races the previous year turned from Bahrain without a single point. And while broken hydraulics could be fixed by engineers, the tire problem became fatal. Bridgestone had known about the rule change since autumn, but it turns out that building a tire to last an entire race wasn't just about changing the compound, it meant changing Bridgestone's entire engineering DNA. While Michelin rivals were collecting terabytes of data from 7 different teams, Bridgestone developed their tires in near isolation, relying almost exclusively on Ferrari. And when the season began, it became clear they hadn't had enough information. The track chemistry, designed for years around short, aggressive sprints, simply couldn't survive 60 laps. Renault, working with Michelin, had a natural advantage here. The French rubber was inherently more durable over long distance instance, but Bob Bell, Tim Dunsham and their engineers went further. They embedded the principle of tire conservation directly into the architecture of the chassis. They grouped all the heaviest components as close to the center as possible: engine, gearbox, ballast. Think of a dumbbell. The closer the way to the center, the easier it's to spin. For a racing car, this means the R25 changed direction sharper and more precisely, without fighting the nose on a corner entry, which meant the front tires were significantly less during direction changes. But architecture was only half of the equation. Renault understood. A chassis like this wouldn't suit a driver who relied purely on reflexes. It demanded someone who could feel tire degradation before the car started sliding. And they already had a driver whose style was perfect match. During winter testing, most teams would run their cars on empty tanks by habit, chasing record lap times for the cameras. Alonso did the opposite. He spent weeks circling Barcelona in a deliberately heavier car, ignoring the timing screens. He wasn't driving to show speed. He was collecting data. At exactly what steering angle the front left tire begins to overheat. How shifting his line by a few centimeters could save a millimeter of tread. He rewired his all racing habits to become the perfect extension of this machine. Renault engineers later recalled that Alonso would return from the track and sit over telemetry data for hours. He didn't wait for instructions. He searched for the sections where tire resource was being wasted. Flavio Briatore, the team principal, put it precisely. Most drivers just want the fastest car. Fernando wanted to know why it was fast. The analytical approach, the ability to understand the physics of the process rather than simply driving on instinct, synced perfectly with engineering department. And the engine they integrated into this chassis turned out to be just as unconventional as their drivers' methods. Beneath the carbon bodywork of the Renault R25 sat a 10-cylinder engine, the RS25, and its geometry was a direct consequence of how the engineers built the chassis. Most teams at the time, including Renault themselves in previous years, tried to use the widest possible cylinder bank angle to push the center of gravity as slow as possible. But when designing the R25, the engineers made a deliberate compromise and settled a narrow 72 degrees. This made the engine block significantly more compact in width, and that compactness allowed them to dramatically narrow the rear of the car, directing a cleaner airflow into the rear wing. More rear downforce means less sliding in corners. Less sliding means less tire wear. All three decisions, chassis, suspension, engine angle, pulled in exactly the same direction. Alonso felt it on his very first test run, not in the telemetry numbers. Physically, the car entered an apex differently from anything he had driven before. It didn't fall into the corner under the weight of displaced mass. It rotated sharply and immediately, as if the center of gravity sat directly beneath him. He became back to the pits and told the engineers, "This car let me drive the way I think, not the way it wants." That responsiveness meant Alonso could open the throttle earlier than any competitor. And opening the throttle in a Renault R25 meant waking up this. The V10 Era is the only moment in Formula 1 history when an engine sounded exactly the way an engine should sound. Not powerful and bassy, not quite like a modern hybrid, but sharp on one frequency, on the edge of what the air processes as sound, rather than the pressure on the air drums. People who sat in the grandstands during those years describe it in the same way. After the car pass, the ringing stays in your ears for minutes. That piercing note was born at 19,000 RPM. At those revs, every piston makes over 300 strokes per second. Combustion chamber temperature holds around 2500 degrees Celsius. Between piston and cylinder wall, an oil film, a few microns thick. The only thing preventing metal from touching metal. If that film breaks, even for an instant, components begin wearing at a rate where the engine may not survive to the next corner. But the real test of the R25's architecture didn't happen in the garage, it happened on the asphalt of the Nürburgring. To understand how Renault manages the tire situation, let's look at their main rival. McLaren had built the fastest peak speed car of the season, but where their machine burns through tires, to maintain pace, the balance of the Renault allowed Alonso to run the same speed while preserving his rubber. Ahead, Kimi Räikkönen, leading, extracting everything from the McLaren. Behind him Alonso. Fernando doesn't attack. He simply matches the leader's pace, keeps his tires intact, until the leader runs into a Sauber that's a full lap down. Räikkönen tries not to lose time and brakes too late. The braking force exceeds the grip limit, the front right wheel locks. The tread grinds against the asphalt and leaves a flat spot, a small section where instead of round profile there is now a flat surface. Kimi could have pitted over a safety concern, but that would mean handing the win directly to Alonso, so McLaren decides to gamble. At over 200 km/h, a wheel with a flat spot no longer rolls, it hammers the asphalt with every rotation. Each impact travels through the suspension arms into the carbon structure, which is simply not designed for this kind of cyclic load. Räikkönen feels it, feels the vibration, but he doesn't back off, he can't afford to. Because behind him is Alonso, who is reading this problem through sector times. Instead of protecting his own car and settling for a guaranteed second place, Fernando starts stamping fastest laps one after another. With every kilometer the gap closes. 7 seconds, 5, 3. Alonso's pace is a trap. He is forcing McLaren to keep pushing on a disintegrating machine, giving Räikkönen no chance to slow down and safely reach the finish. The final lap begins. The gap is down to 1.5 seconds. Under heavy braking into one of the corners, the carbon front suspension arms of the McLaren can no longer absorb the accumulated fatigue from those repeated impacts, and they shatter. The wheel detaches, the car is launched into the gravel. Alonso drives through the cloud of dust and takes the win. 4th win in 7 races. The driver who objectively didn't have the speed advantage has just outraced the fastest car in the field. Alonso extends his championship lead. The Schumacher empire is left far behind. But to understand where his ability to read a race with the ice-cold clarity under maximum pressure comes from, you have to go back to where it all started. Fernando Alonso was born in Oviedo, a coal town in northern Spain, where the mines and factories were still running, and where his family had no money for motorsport. His father worked as a factory mechanic and built Fernando's first car from whatever he could find. Spare parts were almost non-existent, sponsors there were none. If he trained during a race, Fernando kept going on slick tires, because a wet weather set simply didn't exist in the budget. The family rule was blunt: if you burn out the tires or come back with a wrecked car, there is no next race, because there is no money to replace it. That condition taught Alonso something no simulator even could: to think of a car resource as something finite, something to calculate ahead of time, not to consume right here and now. But calculating the resource of metal and rubber is only half of the equation. The other half is your own body. Cockpit temperature during a Grand Prix in Bahrain or Malaysia exceed 50 degrees Celsius. Through sustained corners, neck muscles hold a lateral load equivalent of 30 kilograms, not once, but through every one of those corners for nearly 2 hours. Heart rate during an attack lap holds around 180 beats per minute. Under that level of load, the body begins shutting down everything that isn't critical. In the V10 era, a race was an analog battle, and Alonso's radio transcripts from the 2005 season are the benchmark of that race in isolation. No unnecessary emotion, just a few short technical sentences over the entire race, and only when it actually changed something. The rest of the time, silence and concentration. That ability to keep a cold head while the body is operating on the edge of the survival is what allowed him to make 0 errors during those 12 laps at Imola, where there was nothing in his mirrors but Michael Schumacher's red car. Now you know who is sitting in the cockpit in the front of the Red Baron. A kid who grew up with no margin for error. A driver with an engineer's mind who can find anomalies in telemetry data himself. A racer whose heart rate is pushing 180, yet he silently parks the car on the apexes, blocking every possible line. For 12 laps of that dead-end defense, Schumacher never found a gap. Alonso takes the win. Schumacher finished second. At the end of the season, he became world champion. 24 years old, the first Spaniard in Formula 1 history to hold that title. 5 years of Ferrari dominance stopped. Not by a team with unlimited budget, by a kid from Oviedo in a car built around one single idea: preserve the resource longer than anyone else. But Ferrari did the only thing it could in that situation: it adapted. In 2006, the rule changed again. Tire stops returned, and the V10s were replaced by V8 engines. Ferrari built a new car that once again reclaimed the speed advantage. Schumacher, 37 years old at that point, was chasing 8th title, a record no one had ever taken before. And for the entire 2006 season, the two of them ran side by side, trading wins, mistakes and penalties, right up to the moment the season reached Suzuka. Japanese Grand Prix, second to last race. Alonso and Schumacher arrive at it in level on points, something Formula 1 hadn't seen in a long time. Whoever wins this race effectively decides the championship. Both men know it. Schumacher takes the lead in the opening laps and holds it. Alonso slots in behind and never lets go. Stays within 5 seconds, never tries to overtake, but never gives Ferrari even a matter of breathing room. To maintain this pace, Schumacher is forced to extract maximum from the engine continuously. No laps to recover head cycle, no rest. Lap 36. First, a faint blue smoke from the Ferrari's exhaust, then more. Ferrari stops on track. The new engine that was supposed to deliver the legend's 8th title couldn't hold the pace. Alonso forced it from the second position. Alonso drives through the white smoke and takes the win, that effectively guarantees him his second championship title. The youngest two-time world champion in Formula 1 history at that point. But what happened next says more about him than those two titles. 2007. Alonso moves to McLaren, the team with the fastest cars in the field at that point. Everything looked perfect. But recent months, an internal clash between Alonso and young teammate Lewis Hamilton became very public. The team was pulled into a massive espionage scandal. The reigning two-time champion lost the championship by a single point, left McLaren mid-controversy and walked away with the reputation as someone who tears team apart from the inside. The very next season he returned to Renault, back to where he started. Then Ferrari, 5 seasons. Alonso finished second in the championship 3 times, in the years where the car gave any chance at all. In the rest, he simply drove faster than the machinery underneath him deserved. In 2012, he lost the title to Sebastian Vettel by 3 points, with a car that objectively had no right to be that close. Then, McLaren again. 3 painful seasons with Honda, an engine that simply didn't work. And alongside all of this, other form of motorsport. He becomes World Endurance Champion, takes 2 wins at Le Mans 24 Hours, adds a Daytona 24 Hours win. Even at Indianapolis 500, in his debut attempt, he tore through the field and ran with the lead pack until Honda engine failure again ended it 20 laps from the finish. The telemetry from his final season shows the same extraordinary braking precision, but in the radio, the cold silence from 2005 is long gone. From the desperate chat about GP2 engines to managing the entire team strategy live from the cockpit. He wasn't getting slower, he wasn't giving up, he simply almost never again had under him what he had in Renault. And that leaves a question with no clean answer. 2 titles at the very start of career, and nearly 20 years after, where he continuously produced more than the machinery allowed. Is this a story about how in Formula 1 even the most gifted driver is powerless without the right car? Or is it a story about how a difficult character shuts the doors of top teams, costing him at least 3 guaranteed titles? So who is he? A victim of a circumstance or the architecture of his own downfall?